Tonight, we're drifting through the story of the original PlayStation. Not the PS5, not the console wars as they look today. Just the first PlayStation, the gray box that made a disc feel like a passport to a new world. If you're awake, you'll hear a calm history of how PlayStation happened, why it worked, and how it quietly changed what games could be. And if you're falling asleep, that's perfect too. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing slow down. We'll move gently, like turning pages in a magazine you used to read under a desk lamp. And we'll begin in the early 1990s, in the moment before PlayStation existed at all. The origin story starts with an unlikely pairing: Sony and Nintendo. For a time, Sony was involved in work around a CD-based idea connected to Nintendo's ecosystem. Discs promised more storage, richer music, and more room for storytelling than cartridges could easily offer. But plans changed and the partnership fell apart. Sony then faced a choice that feels quiet on paper, but huge in reality. Walk away and treat the effort as a lesson, or build something of their own and step into a world Sony had never led. Sony chose to build. Sony Computer Entertainment formed, and the PlayStation project became real, a console designed for 3D worlds and CD media. One reason PlayStation took off is simple: developers wanted it. Sony aimed to make the platform approachable for studios, with tools, documentation, and support that made it easier to build and ship games. That mattered in the early 90s, when development could be expensive, hardware could be tricky, and smaller teams could get locked out of the future. At the same time, the industry was turning a corner. Games were trying to become bigger, louder, and more cinematic. Storage limits started to feel like a ceiling. PlayStation arrived with an invitation that sounded almost gentle. Here is room. Here is space. Here is a platform that wants you to create and wants you to experiment. To understand why that invitation landed, picture the mid-1990s. Cartridges were common, reliable, and fast, but they were costly to manufacture and limited in storage. Meanwhile, the jump to 3D was underway, and it was messy. Some 3D looked like magic. Some 3D looked like a handful of triangles pretending to be a person. Still, everyone could feel the direction. The future would be three-dimensional. Competition was real. Sega had the Saturn. Nintendo was building what would become the Nintendo 64. Sony was the newcomer, trying to be taken seriously without a long history of mascots and beloved franchises. Sony also marketed PlayStation differently. It wasn't pushed as a toy. It was presented as a mood. Modern, slightly surreal, late-night cool. That tone mattered because PlayStation was entering homes not just as hardware, but as culture. Then the console launched in Japan on December 3, 1994. A gray machine with a promise: 3D worlds, CD quality audio, and a library that could grow quickly. Early launches are about trust. People aren't buying what exists now. They're buying what they believe will arrive next. Sony needed momentum, so it kept building relationships, kept courting developers, and kept feeding the idea that PlayStation was the future. In 1995, the first E3 arrived in Los Angeles, and the industry suddenly had a shared stage. Sega talked price. Then Sony responded with a moment that became legend. $299. Short, confident, and perfectly timed. Later that year, PlayStation launched in North America on September 9, 1995, and in Europe on September 29, 1995. Once arrived, it spread fast. Part of that speed was the CD format. Part of it was third-party support. And part of it was simply the feeling that PlayStation belonged to the next era, while everything else felt like it was trying to catch up. It's hard to overstate how much the CD format changed the business side of games. Cartridges were sturdy, but expensive to produce and limited in storage. CDs were cheaper to press, easier to ship in large quantities, and roomy enough for music, voice, and video. That mattered to publishers. It reduced risk. It made it easier to take chances, especially on games that needed multiple languages, longer stories, or big soundtracks. It also made it easier for the PlayStation library to grow quickly, because the pipeline from a finished game to a manufactured product became smoother. When the economics get easier, the creativity often expands. And in the PS1 era, you can feel that expansion in how many different kinds of games appeared, and how quickly studios started experimenting with scale. PlayStation begins as an idea that almost doesn't happen. Sony commits, builds a developer-friendly platform, launches in Japan in 1994, then arrives in the West in 1995 with a legendary pricing moment behind it. Now we slow down and talk about what owning a PS1 felt like. Because history isn't only dates. It's also the everyday rituals. You lift the lid. You place the disc. You close it gently, like you're sealing a tiny world inside the console. You press power and the room changes, and you wait for the world to load. The PlayStation boot sequence deserves its own small moment. The first thing you hear is that rising tone, part chime, part signal, like a door unlocking. Then the logo appears, and the console feels officially awake. After that, the BIOS screen becomes a quiet hub. Memory card, CD player, and configuration. You can sit there without playing anything and still feel the era. You can check saves, rename blocks, delete something carefully, or just browse the little icons that games created. Even this menu had a mood. It was minimal, almost clinical, but strangely comforting. For a lot of players, that startup sound and that simple menu are the true beginning of a PS1 session. A small ritual that says calmly, you are about to go somewhere. The PS1 experience has a rhythm. Sometimes it's fast, like an arcade game with a sharp countdown. Sometimes it's slow, like an RPG town theme that loops while you decide what to do next. And in between, there are loading screens. Today, we think of loading as a flaw. Back then, loading screens were a breath, a moment to sip a drink, a moment to glance at the manual, a moment to hear the disc spin and feel the machine working. Even the smallest details became familiar. The way the console looked in the dark, the way a controller cable rested on the carpet, the way you remembered exactly where you left your memory card, because losing it felt like losing a whole life. Saving your game is one of the most PS1 rituals. It isn't automatic. It's a choice you make, often at a specific moment, in a specific place. You reach a save point, open a menu, and commit your progress to a memory card. A memory card isn't just storage. It's proof. Proof you got past that boss. Proof you found that secret. Proof your time mattered. And there's always a faint worry. Is the card full? Did I save? Did I overwrite the wrong file? The PS1 era taught you to respect your progress and to protect it like it was something fragile and real. The controller tells its own story. Early on, PlayStation's controller is simple and digital, but 3D worlds demand finer control. Analog sticks arrive, and later the DualShock arrives, bringing twin sticks and vibration into the mainstream. That change isn't just comfort. It shapes game design. Movement becomes smoother. Cameras become more manageable. Rumble becomes a subtle language, a hit, a crash, a heartbeat, a warning. And then the living room starts to fill with accessories. Multi-taps for group sessions, light guns for shooters, racing wheels, dance pads as rhythm games begin to show up. A living room becomes a little arcade, and the PS1 becomes the machine that makes it happen. Behind the scenes, PlayStation grows through developer culture. Sony wanted studios to build on the platform, and the PS1 becomes known as a strong home for third-party games. That means variety. Big publishers, yes, but also smaller studios taking chances. Games that try strange ideas. Games that feel personal, experimental, or rough around the edges. There is even a hobbyist-friendly symbol of the era, the Net Yaros, a special black PlayStation kit meant for learning and tinkering. Most players never touched it, but it represented something important. PlayStation wasn't only a place to consume. It could also be a place where people imagined making games, where the door felt a little more open than before. As PlayStation gained momentum, something subtle happened across the industry. Creators followed the space. Studios that wanted bigger worlds, bigger audio, and more cinematic presentation found the disc format attractive. And publishers noticed that players were showing up in huge numbers. The result was a steady migration of attention toward PlayStation as a primary platform. This didn't happen in a single week. It happened through decisions, meetings, prototypes, and success stories. A game launches on PlayStation and sells well. A studio sees the tools are workable. A publisher sees the manufacturing is practical. And suddenly, PlayStation feels like the safe bet for ambitious projects. That feedback loop is one reason PS1's library grew so fast. Not because Sony made every game, but because Sony made the place where so many different games could exist. Now we can walk through the PS1 library not as a loud list, but as calm rooms. First, the early proof games. Ridge Racer feels like a statement. Fast, stylish, arcade energy at home. Wipeout feels like futurism with a pulse, where music and speed become one sensation. Tekken turns the living room into a tournament. Friends become rivals. Rivalries become traditions. And someone always insists they're just warming up. These early hits matter because they prove PlayStation is not a curiosity. It's a place where people want to spend time and where developers want to build. The PS1 also becomes a home for an arcade feeling. Not only arcade-style original games, but the sensation of bringing that bright, fast energy into a living room. Menus that feel like cabinets. Soundtracks that pulse. That one more try rhythm. In many homes, the PS1 is the first console that makes the living room feel like a small arcade, especially when friends are over. Even when you're playing alone, the energy is there. Quick restarts, high scores, a sense that practice matters. This matters culturally, because arcades were fading in some places, while home consoles were rising. PlayStation didn't replace the arcade perfectly, but it captured part of the spirit and carried it forward into a new era. Racing then evolves from arcade fun into obsession. Gran Turismo arrives and makes driving feel serious, almost like a hobby. Cars become collectibles. Tracks become routines. You replay a corner to shave off half a second, not because you have to, but because you want to. This shift shows a new kind of real. Not just fantasy worlds, but detailed simulations that reward patience. And the PS1 becomes a place where both styles can live. Arcade speed and realistic focus. Quick sessions and long ones. You can play for 5 minutes or lose an entire night. And the console never judges which kind of player you are. Fighting games become their own language on PS1. They're not just games you play. They're events. Tekken helps make matches feel like ritual. You learn a character the way you learn a song, through repetition. You memorize timing. You discover combos by accident. You watch the replay and swear you can do it again. Then you call someone over because you need a witness. Fighting games are where a lot of PlayStation friendships form. Not because everyone is friendly, because everyone wants a rematch. And the PS1 era becomes full of those moments. A controller handed to a friend. A challenge issued across the couch. And a match that starts with the same breath every time. Role-playing games become one of the biggest cultural shifts of the PS1 era. Because on PlayStation, RPGs don't stay niche. They become mainstream events. Final Fantasy VII is the iconic turning point. A huge story, a huge soundtrack, and cutscenes that felt impossible at the time. People who had never touched a turn-based battle suddenly cared deeply about a cast, a world, and a journey that took weeks. And once that door opens, more long adventures follow. More worlds that live in your head after you turn the console off. The PS1 helps normalize the idea that games can be long, emotional, and cinematic. Not as a bonus, as the main attraction. As RPGs grew on PlayStation, another quiet change helped them spread. Localization improved. More games arrived with stronger translations, clearer menus, and voice work that made stories easier to follow for wider audiences. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes it was charmingly awkward, but it was improving, and that mattered. Because the PS1 era is when long-story games start reaching people who didn't grow up with them. A player who only played action games could still be pulled into an RPG if the characters felt readable, the world felt inviting, and the music did its job. Discs helped here too, because more text, more audio, and more cinematic scenes fit more comfortably. So PlayStation doesn't just host RPGs. It helps RPGs travel across countries, across genres, and across different kinds of players. Action and adventure also evolve in this era. Tomb Raider brings exploration into 3D spaces that feel vast and mysterious. You aren't just moving through levels. You're navigating places, learning them, getting lost, then finding your way. At the same time, platformers create comfort. Crash Bandicoot becomes an icon of bright challenge. Spyro becomes a warm, colorful counterweight to the edgy marketing. And these games carry a particular PS1 feeling. A world you can learn by heart. A level you can run with your eyes half closed, guided by muscle memory and music. The PS1 era is full of that. Games that become familiar places and stay that way for years. Now, gently, we step into horror. The PS1 era reshapes fear. Not loud fear, slow fear. The kind that creeps. Resident Evil helps define survival horror with limited resources and tense pacing. The dread comes from scarcity, from hearing something before you see it, from opening a door and realizing you may not have enough to survive what's behind it. Silent Hill arrives with a different flavor, psychological, dreamlike, and uneasy. Fog becomes a design tool. Sound becomes a warning. Silence becomes its own kind of threat. These games show PlayStation can be atmospheric, that it can use mood like a weapon, and they leave a legacy that still echoes in horror games today. The PS1 era also proves games can be cinematic. Metal Gear Solid becomes the famous example. Stealth, drama, humor, and philosophy sharing the same space. A game that feels like a film, but stranger, because it can only exist as a game. And beneath the famous titles, something else is happening. Studios are learning 3D, learning cameras, learning how to guide players without words. Early 3D is awkward and charming. Textures wobble, lines shimmer. Characters sometimes look like geometry homework. But in the moment, it feels like magic, because yesterday was flatter. The PS1 era teaches imagination to fill the gaps and makes that gap feel like part of the charm. Full motion video, or FMV. On PS1, video cutscenes became far more common than they had been on many cartridge systems. Sometimes it was grainy, sometimes it was beautiful, but it created a new expectation. Games could pause, show you something cinematic, then return you to control. Voice acting also became more common, and even when it wasn't perfect, it made games feel bigger. A character speaking out loud can make a scene feel more real. A narrator can give an adventure a sense of structure. And sound design becomes more intentional because the console can handle richer audio. The PS1 era is where games begin to speak more often and where presentation becomes part of what people talk about when they describe a favorite game. Sound and music. The PS1 era is remembered as much through audio as through visuals. CDs allow fuller soundtracks, clearer voices, and music that can sit in your memory like a real album. Some games lean into electronic energy. Some lean into orchestral drama. Some use silence, footsteps, and distant noise to build tension. A PS1 night is often a soundscape. The menu theme, the disc spin, the first notes of a level. This changes how games are remembered. Not only what you saw, but what you heard. And when people feel nostalgic for PS1, they often remember music first. A theme that returns instantly, like opening a door to an old room. In the PS1 era, soundtracks often escaped the game and became their own souvenirs. Players would recognize themes outside the console, humming them at school or replaying them in their heads while staring at the ceiling. Some people collected soundtrack CDs. Some just replayed a menu because the music felt calming. And because the disc format allowed richer audio, composers could do more. More layers, more variety, more atmosphere. This also changed how games were discussed. Not only is it fun, but how does it feel? How does it sound? A PS1 game could have an identity built from music alone, the way a film can. And for sleep history, that's a gentle thought. A whole era remembered through melodies. Magazines, demos, and sampling the future. In the 90s, you didn't always know what a game was before you tried it. Discovery happened in stores, in conversations, and in magazines. And especially in demo discs. Demo discs were tiny treasures. A single level, a menu screen, 5 minutes of gameplay. and suddenly you could imagine the whole world. Some demo discs came with magazines. Some came through subscriptions. PlayStation Underground added its own inside access vibe, with previews, videos, and demos that made the future feel close. The PS1 era often felt like sampling the future a little at a time, like taking small sips of what would become the next decade. Before modern streaming, previews had a different flavor. A short video on a demo disc, a grainy screenshot in a magazine, a paragraph describing a game that wasn't out yet. That was enough to build excitement for weeks. PlayStation Underground leaned into this feeling, presenting previews and demos like a friendly package from the future. And because you couldn't instantly watch 20 opinions online, your imagination did more of the work. You pictured what the full game would be. You tried to guess how it would play. You talked about it with friends like it was already real. This slower, more imaginative hype cycle is part of why the PS1 era feels cozy in memory. Anticipation had time to breathe. Rentals and weekend rituals. For many players, PS1 wasn't only about buying games. It was about renting them. Walking into a store, scanning shelves, choosing something by cover art and pure instinct. Rentals made experimentation normal. You could take a risk on something weird for a weekend. And sometimes that weird game became a favorite. A lot of PS1 nostalgia is nostalgia for the ritual. Friday night, a rented case, a snack, and a long session that blurred into early morning. The PS1 era grew in those weekends through habit and comfort, as much as through marketing. Another small PS1 memory: scratch discs. Most players eventually met the moment when a game wouldn't load, or the music skipped, or the console made a sound that felt worried. Then came the gentle fixes. Wiping the disc carefully from the center outward. Trying again. Holding your breath at the loading screen. Sometimes the disc worked. Sometimes it didn't. And when it did, it felt like you had rescued the game, like you had personally saved it from disappearing. These tiny dramas were part of the era. They made physical media feel alive, but also vulnerable. And they made victories feel sweeter, because you weren't only beating the game. You were also keeping the game running, keeping the world accessible, keeping the night going. We've watched PlayStation rise through momentum, format, and feeling. We've explored rituals like discs, loading screens, and memory cards. We've walked through racing, fighting, RPGs, platformers, horror, and cinematic ambition. And we've touched the discovery culture that made PS1 feel alive between releases. Now we spend time in the late 90s peak, when the library becomes unbelievably deep. This is the era where the shelf starts to feel endless. And nearly every kind of player can find a home, from quick sessions to long adventures. As the PS1 library matured, re-releases became part of the ecosystem. Budget lines like Greatest Hits or Platinum Editions made popular games easier to buy later in the generation. This matters because it extends the life of a console. A player who joins late can still catch up. A family can buy classics for less. And a game can become more than a release date. It can become a long-term favorite that stays on shelves for years. In a sleep history kind of way, it's a gentle reminder that culture isn't only made by the newest thing. Sometimes it's made by the things that stay available long enough to become shared experiences. A classic isn't only a great game. It's a great game that lots of people actually get to play. sports games, and the every household titles. The PS1 era thrives on sports games, the kind of titles that show up in almost every home. Even if you weren't a sports fan, sports games could become party games. Quick matches, friendly rivalries. The same way fighting games became tradition, sports games became routine. And then there are action sports moments that feel like pure culture. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater becomes a soundtrack, a vibe, and a perfect loop of practice and flow. Landing a trick feels like learning rhythm. These games help explain why PlayStation became so widely owned. They weren't only for one type of player. They were for a whole household. Couch multiplayer. The PS1 era is social in a very physical way. You hand someone a controller. You pass it back and forth. You watch each other play, commentating like it's a sport. Multi-taps make it possible to bring a whole group into the same game. And even without modern online systems, the PS1 feels connected because it's shared. You remember who always picked the same character, who always paused at the worst time, who always claimed the controller was broken after losing. These moments sound small, but they're the glue of nostalgia. The PS1 wasn't only a console. It was a reason people sat in the same room, looking at the same screen, making the same memories. Odd experiments and forgotten favorites. As the generation matures, the PS1 becomes a home for experiments. Games that feel like they could only exist in that era. Stylized art directions. Odd stories. Puzzle ideas that don't fit modern categories. Small budgets with big swings. Sometimes an experiment lands perfectly. Sometimes it doesn't. But it adds texture. It makes the console feel like a marketplace of imagination, not just a pipeline of safe hits. This is one reason PS1 libraries feel personal. Everyone remembers a different weird game. A title they found by accident, loved quietly, and never stopped thinking about. Rhythm games deserve their own quiet spotlight. They show that PS1 isn't only about action and story. It can also be playful, musical, and a little strange. Rhythm games turn button presses into timing. They turn practice into flow. They turn music into something you perform. Sometimes with a controller, sometimes with a dance pad. And when rhythm games land, they create a very different kind of satisfaction. Not the satisfaction of winning, the satisfaction of syncing up, of matching a beat, of getting a little better, one attempt at a time. These games add variety to the PS1's late library, and they help explain why the console felt like it had something for everyone, even people who didn't think of themselves as gamers. The early internet, cheat codes, and strategy guides. The late 90s are also the era where the early internet begins to shape gaming culture. Not as streaming, not as social media, more like quiet forums, printed cheat lists, and schoolyard rumors. Cheat codes feel like magic words. Strategy guides feel like sacred books. And secrets travel by word of mouth. Someone swears there's a hidden character. Someone claims there's a way to unlock something impossible. Sometimes it's true. Sometimes it isn't. But the chase becomes part of the fun. A shared mystery that lives in notebooks, on scraps of paper, and in the margins of a magazine. The PS1 era is full of that kind of gentle obsession. Not every PS1 night was a long epic. Some nights were quick, social, and loud in a friendly way. Party-style games, short competitive sessions, or simple co-op runs. The point wasn't to finish a story. The point was to share a moment, a fast match, a silly mistake, a comeback, a round where everyone leans forward at the same time. This is another reason the PS1 feels like a household console. It could host long stories, but it could also host quick gatherings. It didn't require a commitment to a 100-hour adventure to be fun. Sometimes it only required one controller and a friend who wanted a rematch, or a group that wanted to laugh for an hour. That flexibility helped PlayStation fit into many different lives. Imports and the gray market side. Some PS1 players chased games from other regions, sometimes for curiosity, sometimes because a title never released locally, sometimes because you heard about it in a magazine and couldn't stop thinking about it. This side of the era isn't neat, and it isn't for everyone, but it's part of the PS1 texture. The sense that gaming was bigger than your local shelf, bigger than your local release schedule, bigger than what you were supposed to have access to. It's another kind of discovery, driven by curiosity, and it helped build the feeling that PlayStation was a global platform, not just a regional one. The PS1 library is also full of licensed games, movie tie-ins, TV tie-ins, games that existed because a brand needed a game. Some were surprisingly decent. Some were unforgettable for the wrong reasons. But they're part of the era, and they add to the feeling of a massive, messy shelf. Because when you walked into a rental store or browsed a used games bin, you saw everything mixed together. Masterpieces next to mysteries, classics next to experiments. And the licensed games, even when they were rough, helped define the texture of the time. They remind us that the PS1 wasn't curated like a modern storefront. It was a wild marketplace, and part of fun was not knowing what you'd get. Now we reach the year 2000 and the PS1 redesign, a smaller, cleaner version of the original console. Compact, simple, and quietly charming. The PS1 releases in Japan on July 7, 2000, then later that year in North America and Europe. It arrives at an interesting moment because the next generation is coming. The PlayStation 2 is on the horizon, but the original PlayStation doesn't vanish overnight. It lingers. It stays in bedrooms. It becomes the second console, the one you keep because you love the games. That long overlap becomes part of PS1's legacy, a slow fade rather than a sudden end. Like a favorite song, you keep playing even after you discover a new album. Alongside cheat codes, the PS1 era also had a culture of cheat devices and add-ons that promise secrets. For some players, these were tools. For others, they were simply stories. A friend says there's a device that can unlock everything. A magazine hints at a hidden menu. Someone claims you can access content that was never meant to be seen. Whether or not every rumor was true, the effect was the same. The era felt full of secrets, full of invisible doors, full of the sense that games were bigger than what you saw on your first playthrough. And that sense of hidden depth, even if it was sometimes imagined, made PS1 games feel like worlds that could always surprise you again. The PS1 screen and portability dreams. Accessories like the attachable screen hinted at something players always wanted. A console you could move. A console you could take to another room. A console that felt almost portable, even if it still needed power and a place to sit. It's a small detail, but it fits the PS1 story. PlayStation was always about expanding where games could live. From arcades to living rooms. From living rooms to bedrooms. From bedrooms to late-night trips, packed carefully into a bag with a few discs and a memory card. The PS1 era is full of small portability fantasies like that. And in hindsight, it feels like a gentle preview of the portable future that gaming would eventually embrace. Hardware quirks. PS1s were sturdy, but they weren't immortal. Over years, some consoles developed personality. A disc lid that needed a gentle press. A laser that felt picky. A machine that worked perfectly until it didn't. And then worked again after you adjusted it just right. Over the generation, PlayStation hardware went through revisions, and small changes appeared over time. Most players never tracked model numbers. They just knew their PlayStation, the one that lived under the TV, the one with a scratch on the corner, the one that always, somehow, managed to load the game you loved, even if it took a moment. This lived-in feeling is part of PS1 nostalgia too. The console as a household object, not a museum piece. When you look back, the PS1 era is full of beginnings. Series that would grow for decades start here. Racing franchises become institutions. Horror franchises become legends. Stealth and cinematic storytelling become expectations. Even when a game only has one sequel, the influence can last. The PS1 era creates a language that later consoles inherit. Analog control becomes standard. Cutscenes become normal. Soundtracks become part of a game's identity. And players begin to expect variety. Not one kind of big game, but many kinds. That is the real legacy. The idea that a console can be a library, not a lane. A place where very different experiences can live side by side and still feel like they belong. We're in the sunset years now. The library is deep enough to feel endless. Discovery culture continues through demos, rentals, and word of mouth. The PS1 redesign keeps the platform alive as PS2 rises in the background. Now we can talk about the gentle ending and the legacy. Because PS1 doesn't just end. It becomes a foundation. And foundations stay, even when the house grows taller. In a way, that's what PS1 really is now. The first room in a much larger home. In Japan, the PS1 era even had a charming side quest, the PocketStation. It was a memory card with a small screen and buttons, letting certain games do little companion features. It wasn't universal and it wasn't everywhere, but it represents something playful about the era. Consoles were still discovering what connected could mean. Not Wi-Fi connected, more like connected in spirit. A tiny device that made your saved data feel alive. A small reminder that the PS1 era was full of experimentation, even outside the main console. If you never used one, that's fine. Just knowing it existed adds to the sense of a generation full of odd little ideas, some of which became the seeds of future design. Eventually, Sony stops producing the original PlayStation hardware in 2006. By then, the world has moved forward, but PS1 remains something special, not because it is the newest, but because it is foundational. The PS1 helps normalize discs. It pushes 3D into the mainstream. It encourages third-party development and experimentation. And it proves something important. A console can create its identity through creators and games, not only through long-running mascots. The PS1 era is also the moment gaming starts to feel modern, cinematic, global, and culturally present. A medium not just a hobby. And even if you never owned every classic, you still felt the shift. Because the shift was in the air. When the PlayStation 2 arrived, it didn't erase the PS1. Instead, for many players, it carried PS1 forward. Because the overlap became effortless. A PS2 could often become your new console, while still letting you play PS1 discs, keeping the older library alive. That meant the PS1 era lasted longer than its original hardware. Games stayed in rotation. Favorites stayed accessible. A late discovery could still happen years after release, because the newer console didn't close the door behind it. This is one reason PS1 nostalgia is so widespread. The library didn't disappear when the next generation arrived. It lingered quietly inside the next generation, like an older neighborhood you can still visit, even after the city builds new roads around it. Even now, when you see that gray console, you don't just remember games. You remember a time, a room, a season, a certain kind of night. You remember the quiet excitement of a disc spinning, the calm focus of a late-night session, the feeling of being inside a world you couldn't stop thinking about. PlayStation didn't just launch a brand. It launched an era, and that's why it still feels alive. Because when you remember PS1, you're not only remembering what you played, you're remembering how it felt to discover it, one disc at a time, one weekend at a time, one memory card save at a time. By the time the PS1 era matured, PlayStation was no longer the newcomer. It was everywhere. In living rooms, bedrooms, dorms, and friends' houses you visited after school. Part of that ubiquity came from the library. Part came from the brand. And part came from simple momentum. Once a platform becomes common, it becomes the default place people meet. A friend says, "Come over," and you already know which controller you'll grab. A family buys one console for the household, and suddenly everyone learns gaming through the same machine. This scale is part of the legacy. PlayStation didn't only win a generation. It helped shape what mainstream gaming looked like. It made games feel like a normal part of everyday life, not a niche hobby tucked into a corner. PlayStation begins as an idea that almost doesn't happen. It launches in Japan in 1994. It arrives in the West in 1995 with a legendary pricing moment behind it. It builds a library that defines genres: racing, fighting, RPGs, platformers, horror, and cinematic storytelling. Its controller evolves into the DualShock era. Its culture spreads through demos, rentals, magazines, and late-night conversations. And it lasts long enough to become a foundation for everything PlayStation becomes later. Now we'll end gently. If you're still awake, I hope this felt cozy. If you're drifting off, good. That means it worked. Good night, and thank you for listening.